Okay, then. So I'm delighted to say now at this stage of the show, we're joined by snooker star Darley Dale's Nigel Bond, because remarkably, it's now, well, we've just gone over 30 years to the day since Nigel Bond reached the final of the World Snooker Championships, where he played Stephen Hendry, your old nemesis, Nigel,
Yeah, yeah.
in that
He's
final
been a
in
nuisance.
yeah, in 1995. I remember watching it as a kid with one of my brothers and my dad. So
Yeah,
unbelievable that it's been 30 years already. So Nigel, first of all, how's it going? You okay?
yeah, I'm good. Obviously, I retired from the tour 3 years ago, and probably about the last 10 to 12 years, I've got involved in a lot more in the coaching side of things. In 2018, I was asked to join the WPBSA's delivery team on delivering their different levels of coaching, which I've really enjoyed and got involved in. But then at the back end of last year, obviously with the new Ronnie O'Sullivan Academy opening up in Riyadh, basically I showed an interest in the position. Was interviewed by the project team, and yeah, so I'm here, and they basically offered me the job. So I've been living in Riyadh now permanently for nearly 7 months. The academy is a fantastic facility, and it's the main thing about it really is to obviously try and nurture young talent, and eventually one day, we want to see a Saudi player on the main tour, really.
Okay, fantastic. We'll look back just before we talk about the present day. We'll go back in time 30 years, back to 1995 when Britpop was going wild in the UK. And in that time, of course, Stephen Hendry was certainly in his peak then. But of
Yeah,
course, the mid-90s was when you were at your peak as well, Nigel.
yeah.
So you ended up reaching the final of the biggest event
Mm.
there is in snooker, at the biggest stage of them all, at the Crucible. Just before that tournament started, I mean, how confident were you that year that you could have a very strong year and could go all the way?
Well, to be honest, I'd not had the best of seasons, to be honest, and I think I'd lost maybe before the World Championship. Coming up to that, I think I'd maybe lost 3 or 4 first round matches. So maybe my confidence wasn't going into the tournament wasn't that great. So, and I'd also got a tough draw in Stephen Lee first round as well.
Mm.
Um, but thankfully, obviously, I overcame that, won the match 10-8. And then from then on, I was obviously winning that game, obviously starting to feel a lot more confident. It's amazing what one game can do, to be honest, when you've been on a bad run. And then to win a tough game like that, obviously then stood me in good stead for the rest of the tournament.
And just before your final, then against Stephen Hendry, of course, around that time, Stephen Hendry was just winning everything almost. That's what it felt like. I mean, how were the nerves ahead of the final? Because obviously, this was the biggest match of your career. Millions in terms of a TV audience. Were you nervous before the start of the match? And
Yeah,
if you were, how did
definitely.
you control those
You
nerves?
I'm sure as all players, we all get the butterflies before we kind of, in the dressing room, and before we walk out from that behind that famous curtain. But once you've kind of played a few shots, that is your job. That's what you do. So you've kind of done all the preparation for it. So once you get into the game, then played a few shots, then you kind of just settle down into it, really. But yeah, probably the nerves are kind of before you walk out.
And what was it like having so much media attention? Because, of course, reaching all the way to the final against, Stephen Hendry,
Mm.
I'm sure was
Mm.
world number 1 at the time as well. I mean, what was it like having so much media attention then?
Yeah, and I suppose, like, obviously, I turned professional in '89, and I'd probably been not exposed to. Okay, yeah, we have done after match interviews, etc., etc. But obviously, doing it on BBC and in a BBC event, mainstream TV, and obviously there wasn't all the channels like there was, back then. And there wasn't obviously all the social media stuff that goes along with that back then as well. But yeah, I mean, I certainly the reaching the final of the World Championship was the one that kind of raised my profile more, even though I'd kind of reached the final of the Rothmans Grand Prix, which was on BBC back in 1990. The World Championship is like, it's something else,
And in terms of the final itself, so I think it was an 18-9 defeat to Stephen Hendry. I mean, what did you make of your performance? Because, of course, as we alluded to before, Stephen Hendry was a bit of a nemesis for you in the 90s, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, like in 93, I got to the quarters of the World Championship. Same in 94. Obviously reached the final 95, semi-final in 96. So all those 4 years I lost to Hendry. And obviously my record, obviously going into the final against him, although we'd not played lots and lots of times at that point, my record wasn't great. But to be honest, I did start off the final okay. The sessions were a little bit different then. We only played 7 frames the first session, and I was leading 4-3 after the first session, so I kind of settled. But then, like on the evening session, I missed a few balls, had a bad one, and obviously what Hendry does, he punished me, and I lost that session. I lost that session 8-1 to be 11-5 down at the end of the first day. So from then on, it was always an uphill battle,
But a few years later, you did actually get your revenge over Stephen in what has to be one of the most dramatic finishes to a World Championships match ever.
Yeah, I think it's the only match at the Crucible that's been decided on a respotted black. I'm sure that kind of part of history is still there. So in 2006 it was nice to finally get revenge. Yeah.
How much are you able to get to speak to other legends of the game like Stephen? Because I'm sure you have plenty to reminisce about.
Yeah, we don't speak a lot. It might be good to get on his YouTube channel at some point. His YouTube channel. And have a good conversation with him at some point. Ronnie was here, was in Riyadh because obviously it's the Ronnie O'Sullivan Academy. So Ronnie was here in Riyadh before the World Championship, and obviously back at that point he wasn't sure whether he was going to play in the championship this year. So it was good to spend a bit of time with him, and obviously part of his contract is he'll come 3 or 4 times a year to the academy. So going forward, I will see Ronnie a little bit,
And apart from the final, of course, of the 1995 World Championships, what do you consider to be the absolute highlights of your career?
Well, obviously, yeah, the final of the World Championship, but the one obviously winning the only ranking tournament that I won was obviously the British Open in '96. Again, beat John Higgins in the final frame, needing a snooker. So, but at the end of the day, I've had a good career, 33 years, and kind of snooker's been good to me. Like you say, during the '90s, I was pretty much in the top 16 for that decade. So I've been very, very lucky to do something what was my hobby. Starting off at the Billiard Hall, the Whitworth Institute in Darley, and having a career out of it. And although I retired 3 years ago, I'm still involved in the game.
Yeah, and of course, now in terms of present day, because you've mentioned before about what you do now, because you're currently in Saudi Arabia and you're working a lot in terms of the development of the game in, I guess, sort of nations that have not really had any snooker sort of success before. Is that an example then of snooker trying to broaden its appeal on a global scale?
Yeah, snooker's a perfect game for the Middle East, because it's a lot of the time it's too hot outside to do any other sports.
Hmm.
And we did go to Dubai. Back in the early 90s. We played a ranking event there. There's been a ranking event in Bahrain. And now there's obviously the ranking event in Saudi Arabia. There's also the 167 Golden Ball event, an invitation event in Saudi Arabia as well. So, hopefully, there's a Q Tour Middle East for the perspiring players. That's a pathway to get onto the main tour. So that's good as well. There's no reason why the game can't explode in this region,
And do you reckon if we start seeing, so of course we'll talk as well shortly about what happened in the very recent World Snooker Championships this year and of the significance of the winner there as well. But do you think in a few years' time, if we get more winners from, different parts of the world, that one day snooker might even become like an Olympic sport because of its global appeal?
Yeah, obviously, I'd like to see that. That would be the ultimate for it to gain Olympic status. I think there's quite a few hoops to be jumped through before that happens. In terms of like the politics of the game, the amateur bodies, the world governing body, etc. But I played in a couple of world games. So any sports that are vying to get Olympic status. So it is in the World Games, and hopefully at some point, not too far away, hopefully Q Sports will become an Olympic sport.
And in terms of this year's World Championships, just gone at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield, it was an incredible tournament, loads of great stories, and an incredible story for the winner. So Zhao Xintong became the first ever Chinese player to win. I mean, he was just extraordinary, wasn't
he? First Asian world champion, and he's, and especially coming through the qualifiers as well, right from round one. He's, like they say, he's actually been playing in that tournament for 29 days from when the qualifiers start, which is incredible, really. And obviously he was a massive talent, 3-4 years ago, and then obviously had to serve the ban because of the Chinese match fixing situation and whatever. But he's done his time. He's come back and shown what a fantastic talent he is, and I think it's a breath of fresh air for the game. And China now, so many millions of players playing the game. I suppose law of averages, they're going to produce so many champions.
And just finally, Nigel, and I'm sure you've been asked this question lots and lots of times, but there's always seems to be speculation about the future of the World Snooker Championships and whether it will move away from the Crucible, maybe even outside of the UK in future. What's your take on it? Do you think, the Crucible, it should keep the event, or do you think, you agree with people like Barry Hearn that if it has to stay there, changes have to be made to the venue?
Yeah, obviously, I think, as Barry says, there are the financial implications, etc. Barry, like he says, he's been there for 46 consecutive years or something like that, since the championship started there. So I think he really wants it to stay there. But for that to happen, there's also got to be some input from Sheffield City Council, etc. Up in the finances, if you like, in order for Sheffield to keep it. And I think they are, like he said, they've had meetings there, and they hope to have a decision by the end of the year. Yeah, I suppose I'm quite a traditionalist, and I don't want it to move don't want it to move away. You know, it's like Wimbledon or the Open Golf Championships, etc. And you know, I'd like it to stay there going forward.
Yeah. Okay. Well, fantastic to hear from you, Nigel. It's been an absolute pleasure going back in time, 30 years to 1995, and reminiscing about that remarkable run to the final where, you know, just incredible that a guy from Darley Dale in the Derbyshire Dales went all the way against the world #1 at the time, Stephen Hendry, and ran him really close. So fantastic to hear from you, Nigel. All the best for what you're doing at the moment with the World Snooker Tour and the development of snooker in Saudi Arabia and Asia as well. So thanks for your time, Nigel, and hopefully we'll speak to you again later down the line.
Thanks, Matthew. Cheers.